On this episode of Purposely Curious, I sit down with Leone D'Antonio to discuss my personal experience in not feeling like I am Latina enough. In our discussion, we talk about being born in the United States to Latin parents and how it can be difficult to navigate both worlds. Get nice and cozy with some café con leche as this episode starts now. Hello, Leone. How are you?
Hey, Mary. I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. Ready for our conversation today.
Yeah, it should be a fun one.
Yes. So how is quarantine life treating you?
It's been interesting. Just trying to keep busy doing things with my other podcast and trying to, learn some stuff on the side, like some new art techniques with oil and watercolor painting. And that's about it. Just keeping busy, How about yourself?
Yeah.
I know you're busy working.
I am busy working and I'm kind of dreading having to go back, but other than that, I'm excited. I like working. It's just that one fear factor of the unknown right now.
Right.
But other than that, work has been okay. Yeah,
that's
it really
good.
has. Yeah. But today on this episode, I wanted to talk about something that I have dealt with throughout my life, and that's being told that I'm not Latina enough. Or, that I don't fit into certain cultures. And, it's almost like you're caught in the middle of two cultures and
Right.
You want to belong. You want to embrace both of them. But it's almost like for some people, it might not be something that's doable. And I know
Right.
that there are a lot of people out there that have experienced that. And a lot of celebrities have spoken out about it as well. Have you yourself ever had any of those kind of issues rise?
Yeah, definitely. Quite a few times in my life, for sure. Because I come from a mixed background myself. I'm first generation born here, like yourself, and both my parents are from different countries, different continents, even. And I grew up speaking 3 different languages, and of course, you could only tell where I'm from by my name, but a few people know that I actually speak Spanish as well, because my mom is Mexican.
And what's your other half?
My father was Italian.
So you speak Italian as well?
Yes. And actually, it's kind of weird because, growing up, I think I spoke Spanish and Italian first and then, English third, or something. Because my dad was not around when I was younger. I mean, he was in the Navy, so he was always in the Middle East. And my mom was busy learning English and getting her career going. So I was raised by both my grandmothers. And one only spoke Spanish and the other one only spoke Italian, So I grew up with those 2 languages. And I think by the time my dad came home, he'd come home every 6 to 9 months, And one of those times it was like, whoa, my son does not speak English well. So they kind of started the whole, we're only going to speak English in the house, rule. That way, by the time I'd be enrolled in school and stuff, I'd have English down and Spanish and Italian were fine because of my grandparents and family, But it was, looking back, I don't remember that, but it's just one of those things I think back and I think it's kind of funny because it's like, oh, wow, I actually have to learn English now.
Yeah. And did you feel when you started school, did you feel like, well, first of all, at the school that you went to, were there a lot of other Latinos or what was the culture like in your school?
Yeah, it was definitely interesting because I grew up just shy of downtown LA, a little section of LA called Angelino Heights, which is right where Dodger Stadium is. And right next to that would be Echo Park. And that neighborhood back then, when I was a kid, was mostly Asian. And it was half Latino, half Asian. And by Asian, it was more like Cambodian Asian, so it was these kids that came specifically from that country. And those are all the kids I went to grade school with, and of course my Latino friends, who were mixed either from Mexico or El Salvador, Guatemala, from different countries. But for the most part, I would say it was a 50-50 mix in that neighborhood during that time.
Mm-hmm. And did you feel like you belonged to the Latino community at that time?
Yeah, I don't think I had a problem with that because like I said, I grew up with both cultures. both languages, and the cultures are very similar when you think about them. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, just knowing that the neighborhood kids were kind of like you, some of them were mixed like me as well, where some of them would have parents that were from Central America, but also they were half white or, half Asian, half white, so we were all mixed. And I think that was never a problem growing up, It just seemed like everybody accept everybody, except
Mm-hmm.
I just had a very unique name. That's all.
Yeah, very unique. Very unique, which is a good thing, I think. Mine is very common, like way too common.
Well, both my grandmothers were named Mary.
Oh,
Yeah,
really?
both of them were Maria. Maria Italian,
Maria.
Maria and Mexico. Uh,
Yeah.
you know. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
common, but to me, it's not foreign. It's like I've known that name all my life.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very, very common. I'm very proud of it, and I don't want anyone to think that I'm not. But when it has come down to being in school and, there was always like 10 of us and it was always frustrating.
That's
Like, who are you
funny.
talking to?
Yeah, Maria E,
Um,
Maria B, Maria C. You know,
yeah, we
that's
have
funny.
that situation going on at my work right now. So I've been there longer than my coworker, and if she does listen to this, it's funny, but I basically told her that I'm the original track and she's the remix.
Oh, ouch! You're
No,
like you can
but she
call
knows
me
I was messing
Marianne.
around.
I'm not Mary. I'm Marianne.
Yeah. So I grew up with, I was born and raised in the US in Los Angeles.
Hmm.
And I grew up with, two Salvadorian parents who met here.
Nice.
And so for me, I learned Spanish, obviously, because they spoke Spanish. My mom doesn't really speak that much English. She understands, but she's not comfortable speaking it. With my dad, I did speak a little bit more English because he's fluent in English, but that was
Nice.
my first language that I learned was Spanish. But so my what I'm getting at is my Spanish is very fluent. I'm very fluent, but being that I grew up in LA, it's like a mixture of all Spanishes that are out here,
Right.
which is Mexican, Ecuadorian, you name it. Like those are the people that I was playing with. And so my Spanish is very monotone. And so a lot of times people who were also Salvadorian, would be shocked that when I would say I was Salvadorian because I didn't speak like they did.
Right.
And so a lot of people assumed that I was like Mexican or, again, it was just very like I had no accent. And so I would remember getting kind of butthurt, like, and I tell my mom, like, why don't we talk like them? Like, because I don't feel like they embrace me,
Huh.
or they were just shocked, that I didn't
Right.
speak that way. But it
Right.
was just the way that I was taught to speak Spanish. And then the other thing, too, like I said, my neighbors were, Mexican, Ecuadorian. So I picked certain words. So I might say certain words in my Spanish that aren't Salvadorian and they would correct me. Like my tia would correct me, from my dad's side. I remember she'd always correct me. No, se dice así. This is how you say it,
Right.
but to me it was like, well, all my friends say this. So that was one of the struggles I had. But the biggest thing was that, as I grew up and I started to meet more people, there were certain stereotypes that I didn't fit. And when I say people, I mean, I consider myself Latina, and so all my friends that were Latinos would say certain comments that would bug me.
Right.
That made me feel like maybe I wasn't Latino enough. So it was one of those things, being called whitewash because of how I talk. That bothered me. You know what I
Huh.
mean? But I would never really say anything, but I would just be like, why do they say that? Like, I don't get it. Just, like, yeah, I talk different. Yeah, I present myself different, but that's just the way I was raised. So I don't think my parents raising me a certain way made me necessarily not be Latina. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
Because at home I was eating beans and rice, speaking Spanish. I mean, my Spanish is fluent, not perfect, but it's very, I can get around, right?
Right.
So that was one of those things that I just couldn't understand. And, I don't listen to Spanish music necessarily. And that was another thing I would hear, just because I didn't listen to it, it was like I couldn't relate to it. As I grew up and then my friends who got to know me, who knew that I didn't necessarily listen to Spanish music, I would say like, "Oh, I like this song by so and so," and they would be like, "Really? You listen to Spanish music?" I'm like, "Yes." Like, why is that so hard to believe? Like,
Right.
even though I don't. It's not like a thing I listen to every day. I do appreciate it because it's my culture, right?
Right.
So I grew up in South LA, with neighbors who were black, and so hip hop was huge. Like we'd be listening to hip hop and my neighbors would be braiding my hair because I wanted to be Debrat. Do you remember her?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Funkified?
totally. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And then my dad, on the other hand, he still is a role model, but he listened to rock music. He's a rocker dude. So
Nice.
those were the two genres of music that I grew up with. So I wasn't listening to Spanish music. That's just, it wasn't intentional. It was just something that I loved, those two genres, like hip
Right.
hop, R&B, and that. And so I do feel now like as I'm older that I don't fit into that like Spanish music. I do like it, but I'm not like ooh. But I don't think it makes me less of a Latina just because I'm not like dancing to it or singing it, or you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I don't know if you think I'm overreacting.
No, it's interesting because I mean it's just the it comes down to peer pressure sometimes, because you look at the neighborhood kids who might be half Latino as well, and might look at you and they're trying to fit in, right? They're trying to be like the cool kid who knows everything, speaks correctly or whatever, knows the street slang, or the latest R&B rap album or whatever, right? And then they're trying to be the it crew, and then they look at you and they're like, oh, here's a girl who she she's Latina, but she's acting like she's not Latina just to fit in, but we know she is. Like, we know she goes home and speaks Spanish.
Yeah, this
So
is the thing though. If they did think that about me, I never gave a shit. I just acted like myself.
right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I wasn't trying to be anything. I was just being myself, which was what, like I said, going back to my parents, is how they raised me, right?
Yeah.
And what I just followed my heart into what I liked. So I don't know if maybe I had been raised in Huntington Park, maybe I wouldn't have been into hip hop as much as I was. But I was living in the hood, right? And my neighbors, the Hispanics were the minority there. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
But I
yeah.
wasn't not trying to be Hispanic. Like
Right.
I even went through a little chola phase. Like if my cousin is listening, I went through the whole like, ooh, I love this chola style. You know what I mean? I was young. I was trying to find who I am. Like,
Listening to the oldies.
hell yeah, I went through that phase.
Nice.
But that's just us trying to find who we are, right?
Yeah.
And so when I found the things that fit and I started to really be like, this is who I am, like I started to get certain comments of like, you're not Latina enough. And then at the same time, I don't feel like I'm American enough, right? Because I'm a minority.
Right.
And so that's one of the things that a lot of celebrities have kind of been very vocal about, is that you feel like you are connected to your parents and their roots, and you want to get the best from their culture because that's what you were raised with, but you're also living in the American culture.
Right.
And so we ourselves do this to ourselves where we judge others for maybe them not being to the standard of what we consider to be Latino, right?
Yeah.
So you've heard of Selena Quintanilla?
Yeah, of course. Selena, right? The singer, right?
Yes. Yes.
Who was
So
tragically killed, right, by her manager or whatever, or
yes, Yolanda Saldivar.
yeah.
Yeah. So at the time, and it's documented as well in interviews and everything, people criticized her for not being Latino enough because she didn't really learn Spanish growing up. She was very proud and true to her Mexican roots, but she did say in interviews that a lot of people felt that because her Spanish was weak, she wasn't really, Latina. And only until after her death are people like, wow, one of the best legends we've ever had.
Right.
But she was growing up in the early, she was big in the early 90s and she was dealing with that. It's almost like you have to live up to a certain standard and you already are at a disadvantage if you're born in the US, because then people from other countries are like, well, she's not Latina, not
Right.
a real Latina.
Right.
Then going back to Jennifer Lopez, right? J-Lo was going to play her, Selena, in the movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then when she was picked to play her in the movie, she was also criticized because a lot of Latino fans wanted someone who spoke Spanish fluently, and they criticized her as the pick because she didn't speak very good Spanish. But then the person she was playing, Selena Quintanilla, didn't either, right?
Right.
So where do you think, why is that such a big thing for our culture to just criticize that you have to be a certain way to play that role?
I don't know. I think it comes from being shamed from both sides, you know? It's like, you know, maybe somebody from here won't know the difference, but then you get somebody from your own country, right? And then, or a Latino country, and would look at that, you know, that person and be like, she's not even Mexican. She's not even Latina. Like, why is she even playing her? Why is she portraying that character? You know, and it becomes like a shame thing. It's kind of like a, you know, it's kind of like, oh, it's not real. Like, she didn't act like, you know, they didn't talk that way, you know. And one similar movie I could think about is the movie of Richie Valens, La Bamba. Remember that movie?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, look who played Richie. Remember, Richie Valens was a Mexican American, right? He was born here, but his his parents were Mexican, right? Of Mexican descent, especially his dad. Look who played him. Lou Diamond Phillips, who is not Latino. He's what was he, Filipino, I think, or Native American, or mix, I think.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, but he's not Latino. But he played him, you know. And I mean, it was a decent movie. It's memorable for its stupid lines, you know, but it's just one of those movies that, you know, people looked at and they're like, that's not even, you know, like the kid who was Richie Valens, you know, who died at 17. He was, you know, he was brown. He was brown skinned. He was definitely a Latino, you know, like you can't mistaken that. And you look at Richie Valens, who's very light. You look at Lou Diamond Phillips, who's very light skinned, you know, and I mean, the portrayal was fine because he was just, you know, he was it made him a star, you know, at that moment. But nowadays, like I guess we're so strict and we're so picky now when we see these roles today that I think that movie would have been picked apart today and people would have boycotted it, you know. Back then, I don't think they cared. Back in the 80s, I don't think they cared, you know.
So, let's say, do you think you're not Latino enough if you don't speak Spanish, but you come from parents who do?
I don't agree with that. I mean, I think for me, it's like more of a cultural thing, you know, like do you believe, you know, like, do you honor your ancestors, your parents, you know? It's okay if you don't speak it. I spoke the language, you know, and then not only on top of that, but my parents wanted me to speak it right. So I worked so hard to only pay attention to what my grandmother was saying and my uncles and my mom so that I can keep the language straight. And by that, I mean, I didn't want the, I knew early on that the slang was just dirty, you know? I don't want to bring the slang home because it's like, it's the same like in American slang, you know? It's like saying, hey, what's up, lady? What's going on, yo? Like, that shit ain't gonna fly. If I came home and talked to my mom that way, she'd slap the shit out of me, you know? So yeah, it's one of those.
But what about those kids that are Latinos that parents, because they didn't want them to be discriminated against, opted to not teach their kids?
Yeah, but the problem is teaching them is one thing. They still have the surname. You know what I'm saying?
But that's what I'm getting at. It's not their fault if their parents decided not to teach them, and then maybe they are learning the culture. So I don't think they're any less Latino than me and you for knowing how to speak it.
I don't think they're any less. Of course not. But like I said, but they have to honor the culture, you know?
Yeah, they can honor it
like
even if they don't speak it.
It doesn't mean, you know, paint your house, you know, Dodger blue and white, you know, or, you know, wear the Raiders gear. No, it's like, you know, it's just like, look, hey, be proud of where you're from, know your history, and if you don't speak the language, that's fucking fine. It's just, you know, learn about your family, learn about the culture, learn about the style of cooking, learn about the religion, the customs, you know, of the, you know, the sense of family, of togetherness, you know, friendship, you know, like learn all about that. And, you know, if you can practice that in your life, giving it forward, meaning that you don't have to speak a word of Spanish, but if your friends not going forward in your careers and lives are white or Asian or African American or European, you know, they'll look at you and be like, oh, you know, your name is, Maria Martinez, like tell me about your culture, and you have something to say, you have something to bring to the table, If you
Yeah.
don't, I kind of feel like that's kind of shameful, because it's like,
Yeah, but I think I understand what you're saying, but I think that there are people out there that are very proud of their culture. Their parents just never taught them Spanish.
yeah, but it's speaking it is not the end all be all, like you don't
Mm-hmm.
have to speak it to to be considered one, for example,
Yeah.
it's I mean, for example, my best friend, right? He grew up just like me. He grew up here, both his parents from Mexico. He speaks it perfectly fine, the Spanish, and he speaks
Mm-hmm.
English perfectly fine. His wife, his wife, her parents did not teach her anything Spanish. Yet she had a Spanish last name, a Hispanic last name, and she cannot speak the language at all,
It's
And
not her fault.
no, it's not, and she's a super smart girl. She's an attorney, and but it's just one of those things where, she, it never bothered her in the sense that, not one of her friends said, hey, you don't fit in. Like, what the fuck,
Mm-hmm.
it's just more of a personal thing that she wishes that somebody would have taught her that, back then.
Right.
And
Right.
I get that because I consider myself blessed like you, because we were both taught Spanish in our homes. That's how you had to speak
Yeah.
to your parents, or your mom, for example. My mom, to this day, I'm lucky because my mom learned English when I was young, and my mom was learning English, to establish her career here as an American citizen when she became one. You know, it's great that I still opted to speak to her in Spanish, and to this day I still do. So
Mm-hmm.
if I'm home, I know she's dying to speak English because she loves the practice and stuff, and she speaks it very, very
Mm-hmm.
well. But I'm like, Mom, I'm trying, to speak Spanish so that I don't forget it, and then I can, expand my vocabulary and sentences and grammar and all that, and honestly, at least 3 times a day, or a week, or whenever I see her or talk to her, I'm always saying things like, oh, esa palabra, cómo se dice, because I'm asking, like, how do you say this word in Spanish, So
Mm-hmm.
I'm still learning, even though my language vocabulary is pretty extended. I'm still learning, and I'm grateful that I have that. I mean, but yeah, there's people out there that don't have that luxury, and
Right.
I think that they're perfectly, there's still Latino. There's no problem there. Like I said, I think it comes down with more of who they identify with, because the name is not just enough, and whether or not you speak the language is not enough. It's like you got to know the culture.
Right. So, have you heard of Becky G? She's a pop star, sings in Spanish.
Yeah, yeah,
So she kind of wrote an essay for Pop Sugar, where I guess the quote I'm going to read is that she says, "The truth is, the lack of knowledge does not lessen the Latin blood running through our veins or the stories that our last names carry," which is kind of alluding to what you were just saying right now. And then you also are aware of Miss Rosario Dawson. She
yes,
told a Latina magazine that I think being Latina is about having pride in your heritage. Although I am not a fluent Spanish speaker and I can't make every dish without a recipe, I am 100% Boricua and I am proud of that. And then the other one that I wanted to say was Eva Longoria.
mm-hmm.
She told the Oprah magazine, "I'm proud to have a Mexican heritage, and I've always deeply rooted my identity in it. Then, about 10 years ago, I went to Mexico. When I got there, I was perceived as American because I didn't speak Spanish, and at the time knew very little about the history of Mexico," which is what you were saying.
Right,
Yet in America, I was considered Mexican because of how I looked and my last name. It was confusing. I thought, if I'm not Mexican and I'm not American, then who am I?
right. Interesting. Wow.
Yeah. And then you also have, we talked about the fact that, if you don't speak Spanish, does that make you not Latino? Because sometimes people say, like, oh, your parents didn't teach you and they're judging you all over that.
Right.
Then there's the thing about our skin tone. All of us who are born of Latin heritage, there's Cuba, El Salvador, Brazil, right? Jamaica, right?
Right.
We
Right.
all come in different colors. And so there's also, for those that are Afro Latinos, they sometimes are, people are shocked when they say that they consider themselves Latinos.
Right.
So there's also that skin tone issue. And then there is the other side as well, is that if you're like super light and look very European, people are also shocked that you're Latino. So we're a melting pot, right?
Right.
There is also criticism of certain people who look more one way than the other. Christina Aguilera, she's half Irish and half Ecuadorian, doesn't speak the language. And so she says that she was always criticized for that. But what she told Latina magazine was, I don't speak the language fluently. I should not have to prove my ethnicity to anyone. I know who I am. All I know is no one can tell me I'm not a proud Latina woman. I dove headfirst into Spanish language album for that reason, and I'm planning another one. Anyways, that's pretty much all she said. But
Wow.
yeah, I don't know if there's anyone, that you might want to mention. I have a little bit of a list here.
No, it's good on your list because I'm fascinated with who these people are.
Now, the beauty visionary Kat Von D.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, she told People in Espanol, throughout my entire life, people have assumed that I'm only white, and part of me gets frustrated because I would not be who I am if it were not because I grew up in this Mexican culture. I always say that I am Latina, but I have a stronger connection with Mexico where I was born. There is a visual richness in that culture that inspires me a lot, and you can see that in my work. I also see it in pictures of her house. There's a lot of Mexican things in there.
Huh, interesting. I didn't know that. Huh.
Yeah. And Christina Milian.
Yes.
She told the Huffington Post, as far as Afro-Cuban goes, I'm finding more and more that there's people opening their eyes to seeing that Latinos come in all colors, all shades. You should see my mom and her brothers and sisters. Same parents, but we just vary in color, shapes, and sizes. But we're still all Latinos. That doesn't change a damn thing. You can't tell it's in the core of our blood. And I think that going back to all that is that this is something that is within our own culture, where there is a group of people that criticize certain people for
Right.
not being Latino enough just because we don't fit into what they believe we should be like. And that's the beauty of our culture, is that we are all different.
Right.
The Latino culture is ever changing. And just because I might not fit into what you think I should be like I should be more like you, doesn't make me any less Latinos. Damn, I was just making pupusas and eating them before we started recording, right?
Damn, you're making me hungry. Did you save me some, by the way?
No, I did not.
Ouch. You owe me.
But that was one of the things I wanted to talk about, is just how I feel like we should really embrace everyone. Yes, some of us might be a generation removed, 2 generations removed, but it comes down to the culture.
Right.
It's a lot of people still are Latinos. They still practice the same cultures, but may not speak Spanish. Shit. People from Brazil speak Portuguese and you still consider them Latinos, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like, that's stupid cop out, reason to tell someone they're not Latino enough.
Right.
Okay, I'm getting heated.
I keep thinking of Lupita Nyong'o. You know who that is?
No, I don't.
Lupita Nyong'o. She won the Academy Award, the Oscar, a few years ago for the movie.
Oh, yes.
I think it was 12 Years a Slave.
Yes, she's also an Avenger.
Yeah, that's right. She's in Black Panther. She's she plays Black Panther's girlfriend, I believe. I can't think of her character's name right now. I'm spacing on it. But yeah, you know where she's from?
Mexico City.
Yes.
Yeah. I actually saw a commercial, an interview where she said that a lot of people were shocked.
Yeah, because it's like people assume that she's African, right? Because of of her name, for example, and perhaps her parents, but people know that not only was she born in Mexico and raised there, but she also went to she went to Yale or Harvard? She went to one of those Ivy League schools. So, it's like, that's something you don't expect, because it's, it's just, we're so used to just thinking, oh, if you're Latino, you're usually born here, raised there. If you're African American, you're born here, raised there, West Indian, but then you hear, oh, she's African American looking, but she's really Mexican,
Mm-hmm.
And she knows the culture very well. She speaks Spanish very well.
She does. And I didn't know that until I saw that interview.
Yeah, she's great.
Where she said she was from Mexico City. Like, yeah. I had no clue.
Yeah, she's got to be one of my favorite actors out there, because she's so talented. She's really good at it.
Yeah.
Especially if you like a little bit of horror movies in your life. She was in a movie called Us, where she played two characters in that movie. She played herself as the mom in the family, and then she also played her doppelganger, which is like the evil version of herself, like side by side, which is really amazing.
I've not seen that. You know why.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think? How do you think we can change this thought process that some of us have, towards our own people, just because we don't fit the stereotypical things that they think we should?
Yeah, but you also have to remember that this goes back to those same countries where these people came from. So, for example, if I were to go back to Mexico, whatever, there's some things I can't deal with. Like, for example, I cannot speak science, medicine, or business or law in Spanish. I just can't. Like, my brain is completely empty when it comes to that, which is weird, but it's true. And if I were to go down there and try to, talk to a business person or start a business or something, some deal, like, they look at me like, get the fuck out of here. They'd be like, like you're gringo mentality. Get out of here. You don't know, like they may not, I may not fit in. Like, they may just, exclude me, So
yeah,
it's like, I think here in places like Los Angeles, we're very much accepting, right? It's a melting pot, and there's people here from everywhere. And I think we're just accepting, whether you're, you are from, whatever country, or you are Latino X, or, you're American Latino or mixed or whatever. It's like, I don't think anybody cares so much, but I think there is that sense of, people are still surprised sometimes where, you have a Latino surname, and then they're like, wow, you don't speak it. And it's like, no. And then it's like, what about this? And like, I don't know, we never celebrated that or did this, or, so there's kind of a disconnect where, they don't know the language, they don't know the culture, or the history. And that's I think something like, in a sense, I'm kind of grateful that there are courses in universities where you can take Latino American studies, Chicano studies, that kind of stuff, where you can learn about your own culture. They'll go back to the Aztecs, the Mayans, the Incas, and and the conquistadors from Spain, and Hernán Cortés and all that, people that came here and conquered the New World, and brought religion to the indigenous people, and civilized them in a way, and changed things, and from then on, people became mestizos, mixed, half white European, half Asian, half white European, half Latino, right? And native Indian, and then those kids became, the founding fathers of these Latin American countries that we know of today, but yeah, it's just one of those things where I think that, it's, people should not be shamed because of it, because it's not your fault. Maybe your parents were not around. Maybe they just didn't care enough. Maybe they didn't have a good upbringing with their own parents. Or maybe they're just a disconnect because of where they grew up. Perfect example to tell you is a story. My grandmother, right, who was born in Mexico, right, from Indian blood, right, from Aztec blood. She had a brother. Okay. She had a brother who left at a young age of like 16, 17 years old to come to the U.S. to help build the railroad system. Okay. He came here and was not reunited with his sister for 50 years. So for 50 years, my grandmother and her brother did not see each other. When he was here, even though he was dark skinned, brown, and, over here we knew him as Uncle Jesse, but it was really, his name was Jesus, And he grew up here, knew nothing but perfect English. He spoke perfect English. He had a Hispanic last name, and he ended up marrying an American Russian woman. So his kids are of Russian Mexican descent, Yet he never spoke a word of Spanish because he spent most of his life here. And his wife never spoke a word of Russian because she grew up here. She was just a Russian immigrant, So it's interesting where like my family now is diverted. My extended family is like, oh, I have relatives who are now half Russian, half Mexican, but yet they know nothing about the culture, and they're all elder. They're all older now. They're all like 60 plus years old, but they're now closest to my mom's family than ever because they are excited to learn about the culture, the language, the food, the religion, the history of where we came from, which ultimately was Spain, because my grandfather was Spanish. So my grandfather was Spanish from Spain, married my grandmother, who was a native indigenous Indian from Mexico, and then all the kids were Mexican, born. So, but yeah, it's just so fascinating that we live in a time where there's great cultures out there, great histories that belong to all of us, and if we don't do something about it, like I said, it's not just the language. If you never learn the language, who cares? As long as you learn the history and the culture and traditions, I think that's more than enough, to help propagate the knowledge and spread the knowledge and say, yeah, hey, my last name is Martinez and this is where we came from, or people might, think ultimately, oh, it's Mexico or Spain. And it's like, no. Maybe we came from, Guatemala or Honduras, or, Peru, for example, but there's a history there, and I think that's why it's so important for people to, share that with the world. And it doesn't matter where what you're lacking, as long as you care enough to share and that knowledge that you gain from researching.
Right And if I do have kids, I want to make sure that they're not gonna be missing anything of the Salvadorian culture. That's for sure. I'm gonna make sure that they have that, because my parents, that's how we were raised. You know what I mean? And even though I may not fit the molding of what people think a Latino should be for some, I consider myself Latino. You know what I mean? Right. I just have a mixture of different cultures because I was born in the U.S. Essentially, I'm American. But I definitely want to make sure that that's one thing I can say I'm very proud of my family, is that even if they've married other cultures, they will always stick to our culture and instill that in their kids. Right. And I see that with all of my cousins, and I want to continue that as well, because we don't want to forget our culture, where we come from. And yeah, maybe our Spanish with every generation gets a little off, but they will be Latinos regardless. Yeah. And I'll make sure to tell my kids, if I ever have any, don't let anybody make you feel less Latino just because you can't pronounce that word or you can't shake those hips.
Right.
You are, okay?
They're going to have your blood, so they're going to have no problem shaking hips, man.
Hell yeah.
There's a funny story. I remember my dad was Italian, his family is all Italian. And when he joined the Navy at 17 and a half years old, he joined the Navy right before World War II broke out. So he joins the Navy 6 months later. The Japanese attacked at Pearl Harbor. He was there for that. So when he joined the Navy, I have this book, and this is a fascinating book because there's a lot of racism towards the Japanese people, because back then, remember, it was the imperial, country of Japan. It was not the peaceful country that we know today. It was different back then. But it also showcased a bunch of people that went to war for the U.S. And there are a lot of names on there. Like, for example, these are people that grew up here, right? Like names like Grady or Riley, right? Last names, right? Like James Riley or, Robert Grady, for example, But the story that's not told for them, and it's a little bit different than Latinos, but for them, for example, the U.S. did not like their names because they were Irish. And they said, I don't care that your name is, Robert O'Reilly. You are now Robert Riley. They cut out the O apostrophe. Same thing with Grady. So there's a lot of Irish names that were chopped in half simply because they didn't like the names, and because they were racist towards them. This is back in, the turn of the century, throughout World War II, And then it's funny that after World War II, that kind of shifted in the 1950s right to the Latino culture, where there was, a lot of racism, there was, the riots here in LA back in the day and all that. The birth of Chavez Ravine, which we know now as Dodger Stadium, right? But the people that used to live there, where Dodger Stadium currently sits, the people were pulled out of their homes. They were told, "You're leaving. Like, we're building a stadium. Like, we're kicking your ass out." And there's incredibly sad photos that show, like families being carried out, literally carried out by police, or being beaten, because back then they didn't care. They're like, "We're building a stadium. You get out, move. We don't care. Find a house. Go somewhere else." So it's sad that there's that kind of history here. But, we no longer live like that. We've evolved as a culture. And by culture, I mean every one of us. We see that as wrong, because it's racism and it's sexism. And, we're now evolving to, be a better species as one, or at least that's what we hope for, right? But, it's sad that those histories do exist here in Los Angeles, for example. A lot of people don't know about. And, that's why it's important to know those histories and know that it's like, hey, bad stuff was on those people. Funny thing about that area, what we call Chavez Ravine, is the people that were kicked out. And I met some of those people, by the way, that were kicked out of their homes, many years ago. Most of those people never spoke Spanish, and I didn't know that. I didn't know that. My mom, she's friends with them through her previous, when she had a business, she had clients and stuff, and she knew all these people, and I got to know them. And it's funny because they would speak Spanglish, they never knew Spanish, but they would be like, "Hey, mija, how are you doing today?" And they're like, "Oh shit, she speaks Spanish." Then you speak to them in Spanish, and they're like, "Sorry, I don't speak Spanish." And I'm like, "What?" I'm like, "You're, because they're using a few words here and there, but that's all they remember. They were never taught. Their parents never taught them Spanish, and it's really fascinating that these are people that spoke English, and they were kicked out of their houses, simply because of, where they lived, and they didn't care that they were, struggling or poor or, last names. It says they just kicked them out,
Yeah. What do you think of Spanglish?
I think it's funny. I get a kick out of it because I can use it to, as a joke. I'll joke around with people and use Spanglish and throw in words here and there, and get a good laugh.
Spanglish is very common now. I mean, I say lonche. Estoy en el lonche.
Oh, that drives me crazy. That drives me crazy.
Yeah, but fuck it, I say it. Like el almuerzo.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Did I say that right?
That's right. See.
So one of my best friends, she's actually, her and her friend are doing like a Spanglish podcast.
Nice.
And so, they were both born out here, I think. And, they do a combination of Spanish and English, but I told them that I really enjoy it. But even then, I don't know some of the words they use in Spanish.
Right.
But most of it is in English.
Is it regional? Is that why you don't know the words?
Probably, yeah, because they're both, my friend, she's Mexican and German, and then I don't know what her friend is. I want to say she might be Mexican. I'm not sure. I'll have to ask. But I thought that was pretty creative as far as their podcast. It's like Spanglish, basically.
That's funny.
It's very common.
Yeah, I could see that, but it's one of those things where it's like, for a while, because growing up and when I finally got to high school and I started meeting, people from Central America and South America, Puerto Rico, for example, that I started to pick up on the accents, so I could tell an Argentinian accent from a Guatemalan accent, from a Salvadorian accent, from a Puerto Rican accent. I could almost identify them because they would start speaking and they're like, "How'd you know?" And I'm like, I recognize your accent, because the Spanish that I spoke and I still speak today, I speak it much slower, I met two girls once years ago, and two girls, they once told me, I'm trying my best to speak Spanish from them. They're both from Mexico, right? They were from Veracruz, Mexico, and they told me, you speak like a norteño, And at the time, I didn't know what that meant. I thought they meant like a northerner, like North American, like from the U.S., And I thought it was an insult, So I was like, what do you mean norteño? And they were like, oh, you speak like the people from northern Mexico, And my mom, her family is from the central northern part of Mexico, so they were correct, because the further south you go in Mexico, the different the Spanish sounds like. It's like people speak it much quicker. The dialect's a little bit different. Like the people from Chiapas, for example, that borders, Guatemala, right? They probably speak it closer to the people like speaking Guatemala than they do Mexicans, So that's a really fascinating thing, that I learned. It's like, oh, I didn't know that was a thing, And the same thing with my other half of me, the Italian, It's like I can tell you when I hear a guy or a girl speak, mostly girls, I can tell you where in Italy they're from. I can tell you if they're from the north or from the south because they speak it much like Spanish, where the north they speak it. It's a lot faster and more, articulate and more much quicker and much more slangish. And then in the south they speak it much slower. So I can tell what region they're from, and they're always surprised. And it's like, hey, it's just something you pick up on and you learn,
Yeah. So do you look down on people that use Spanglish?
No, I think it's funny. It's just funny in my mind.
Well, you're stuck in between two cultures. Like my brain, when I think in English. So I'm dominant in English, right? So my Spanish has gotten so much better at growing up, especially now, being a nurse, dealing with so many Spanish speaking patients.
Right.
They usually would send me and, I'm able to perfect it. But I think in English. I don't think in Spanish. So sometimes I might be saying something, and there's a story that I wanted to tell. I remember telling my mom, it was me, my mom, my cousin, and my tia.
Right.
And something happened that I was embarrassed. And I literally we were laughing, and I wanted to say I'm embarrassed. And I said, estoy embarazada, which means in Spanish, I'm pregnant. That's not at all what I was trying to say. I was trying to say I was embarrassed.
So everybody gets up and it's like, oh my God, what? Because they go like, holy shit.
Yeah. I think I was like 14 or 15. My tia understood exactly what I was trying to say, but my mom gave me the death stare. Like,
that's fucking funny.
What the fuck?
That's funny. That's fucking hilarious.
And and that's why I don't, I don't criticize people that use Spanglish, because our brain is thinking in one language.
Right.
And we're trying to say, we're having a conversation with someone quick. You're just trying to get the words out, right?
Yeah.
And so, I think that's, like, how do you say how you're going to park your car in Spanish?
How you going to park your car? I'm trying to remember.
Just say it. Say it.
¿Cómo vas a estacionar tu carro?
Sí, I would say, voy a parquear mi carro.
See, that drives me crazy though. That drives me crazy. Well,
that's why you and I can never date, Leone.
Oh, fuck.
I would drive you crazy.
I'll put that aside. I'll date you any day. No, but here's some funny words. Like banana, right? What's the Spanish word for banana?
Guineo.
See, I don't know that word.
Yeah.
I heard plátano.
Plátano is plantain.
See, but we don't have plantains where I come from.
Ah.
See, another word. But what about pancakes?
Pancake. That's what I call it.
No, in Spanish.
Yeah, that's what I call it.
No. Have
you
ever
had pancakes?
No. If chances are, if you're Mexican in descent, American, you'll hear panqueques, and I'm like, what the fuck is that? I keep every time somebody says that, I'm like, no, that's not the word. It's like for whatever reason they just don't use the word. It's like they always come up with the slang. And I'm like, I don't want the slang. It drives me crazy. I want to learn the proper word.
It is panqueques. I just Googled it. Pancakes in Spanish. Panqueques.
I know. But that's
PAN. That's what it says on Google.
I know, but Google's wrong. think of the translation. It's like,
Yeah, because I just say I want quiero pancakes.
How do you say trunk of your car?
El trunk.
Oh, see. I remember taking
el trunk. Voy a abrir el trunk. I think that's what I say. El trunk. Damn. I'm going to start noticing when I talk to my mom.
So what you're saying is you don't have half the words you should know, right?
Yeah.
That's
What
funny.
is trunk again?
That's a good question. You know, when I took Spanish classes, it was like, el baúl del carro está
El
ocupado,
baúl. Ahí
And I'm like,
está. El
nobody,
baúl.
yeah, but we don't use that word. It's like, I don't even know what word we use. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. La cajuela.
La cajuela. Yeah. That's Mexican, right?
Yeah. See?
Yeah.
But we
Because
don't
I
use
remember
baúl.
el baúl.
See, baúl?
Yeah, we use el baúl.
See, that's Spanish, though. That comes from Spain,
Yeah, we use it in our family.
That's so
I don't know
funny.
why I couldn't think of that right now.
There's a whole hell of a long list of words that just drive me crazy where I'm like, there is a word. I'm like, like when it comes to, for example, I love, cooking and baking and grilling and all that stuff. And sometimes the conversation of nuts comes up, right? Like, yeah, peanuts, right? Peanuts, walnuts, pecans, all those nuts, right? And for some strange reason, like there's no word for all of them in Spanish. Like there is a word for them in Spanish, but they're not used, And it drives me
I would
nuts.
be lost.
It's like,
with the nuts.
It's like, when the paletero comes and you want your, pecan paleta, it's like, you get, oh, me da uno de nuez, por favor. I'm like, what is nuez? I thought nuez meant nuts, because this whole life they told me there was nuts. And I'm like, no, it's pecans, I'm like, it's so confusing. I'm like, no, don't do this to me.
Yeah. It's crazy too because I didn't realize like I'm very fluent in Spanish, but when it comes to ingredients and stuff like that, I'm clueless. Clueless.
That's why like I'll enjoy like looking up those proper channels that do the cooking shows and stuff in Spanish. There's somebody from South America or Spain who's hosting the show, and then they're talking about mixing this and mixing that, and I'm like, oh, that's the word. Oh, that's the ingredient. We're like, here we just use slang, and it's like he's like, yeah, more butter. I'm like, no, it's mantequilla. It's like,
Yeah, it's but it is what it is. You grow up in two cultures, so
right.
You try to make the best of it.
Right.
And I know I have, with that story I told you where I told everyone I was pregnant, even though that was not my intention.
I love that.
It's funny because my mom, she cooks very like Hispanic foods, which I love and adore. But when I cook, I usually don't for some reason. And anyways, I had made Brussels sprouts, and she had asked me like, what had you made? And I told her Brussels sprouts, but I didn't know how to say it in Spanish because my mom never cooked it before.
Right.
So I had to Google it, and I was like, coles de Bruselas. I think I'm saying it right.
Right.
And my mom was like, yeah, I have no idea what you're saying. Like,
yeah. Your mom's thinking like, en mi país esas hierbas se comen los perros.
Oh my God.
Which is like translated to, in my country, those are, weeds that the dog would eat.
Yeah.
And it's like,
I love Brussels sprouts.
And it's like, here we're eating Brussels sprouts and what's the other fancy stuff? Kale, right? For many years, they put a piece of kale on our dinner plate, and now we actually eat it now,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's crazy.
That's funny. It's like, what's the Spanish word for kale? Cale?
Oh.
No.
Is it?
No.
I know. Let's see.
I don't even know.
I'm going to look it up now. This is horrible.
That's funny because there's so much out there, right? That just doesn't easily translate.
Rizada. Col rizada.
See, there's no fucking way I would know that, or nobody in my family knows that,
Yeah. This is what, col rizada. That's what it's called. Yeah. Well, thank you for joining me on this episode where we kind of talk about, those of us who are born in one country but are raised in another culture.
Yeah.
And the idea is that sometimes we don't feel accepted, whether it's by our American counterparts or our own peeps, Hispanics, just because we may not be, we're kind of stuck in the middle.
Right.
And so we're trying to embrace both, obviously. And so I wanted to kind of touch on the subject. I wanted to see what your thoughts were. So I think it was a good little chat.
Yeah, it's fun because it's something that's not talked about. It's like we always have that one person, right? A friend that, that either we can make fun of or they make fun of us. And now it's like, come on, people. It's like, you got to look deeper, you got to look deeper that it's not their fault. It's, maybe the parents' fault, the grandparents' fault, that they didn't, carry on the culture, traditions, or history of where they came from, and that's sad, because
it is. But sometimes, it maybe they did it because they wanted them to fit in, or, like you said, there was discrimination, right?
Yeah.
They didn't want their kids to go through that. And so.
And that's exactly what makes it sad, because life should have never been that way 50 years ago or whatever, 10 years ago, 30 years ago. It should never have been that way because, it probably never was like that in other European countries, where you have African Americans who grew up in London, for example, like they didn't feel that same racism that they felt here probably,
Yeah.
We're probably more accepted,
Yeah. And so my message to anyone who tells anybody they're not Latino enough, it's like, cut it out. Like, let's just, all of us are raised differently, but if we want to embrace the culture, let us.
Yep.
Let us embrace it.
Yep.
Even if our Spanish isn't the best, or we don't speak any Spanish, or we don't dance, right? Or, we don't cook Spanish foods, but we want to embrace our culture from our ancestors, from our parents, let us. Don't criticize us. Just let us embrace it. That's the only way we're going to, we should be proud of where we came from. Right. You know what I mean? And so, anyways, thank you.
It was fun. Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun to talk about. And I hope that this resonates with people, and just so everyone knows, be good to one another out there. And hasta luego.
Hasta luego. That was episode 6 of the Purposely Curious podcast. Make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcast and Spotify, and follow us on social media at Purposely Curious on Instagram and at Purposely C Pod on Twitter. That's Purposely, the letter C, Pod. Until next time, you know what to do.